Have you ever thought about figures who don't just exist in history books, but somehow become absolutely central to the spiritual lives of, well, billions across the globe? We're talking about people whose stories just echo down through millennia, shaping cultures, laws, personal faith for maybe half the planet.
It's an almost unparalleled level of influence, really. A name that truly becomes a cornerstone of civilization and belief.
Exactly. And maybe the ultimate example of this is the figure we know as Abraham.
Right.
He is claimed as the foundational father by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, plus several other faiths we'll touch on too.
He stands as this remarkable link, doesn't he? Across the major Abrahamic traditions, revered in such profoundly different yet somehow connected ways.
And that is precisely our mission in this deep dive. We've pulled together quite a stack of sources, a really comprehensive look at Abraham, who was originally named Abram, of course.
Right, Abram first.
Our goal is to zero in on the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge from all this material. We want to give you a streamlined, well-informed understanding of Abraham's story as it's told in the Hebrew Bible, the fascinating way scholars view its historical context, his incredibly significant role in multiple world religions, and even his, well, surprising impact on art and culture.
Think of it as your essential shortcut, maybe, to grasping why this one figure holds such immense importance across such a vast and diverse landscape of belief.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We absolutely have to start with the main source for Abraham's story, and that's the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. The narrative specifically runs from Genesis 11.27 right through 25.11.
And what's so striking about this part of Genesis is its structure. It's not just a simple timeline. The sources point out how the story is unified by these core themes.
Okay.
There's this constant tension around God's promise of countless descendants and a specific lamb, but these promises are perpetually threatened by crises. It uses a literary device the material calls the obstacle story.
An obstacle story.
Yeah.
That really rings true when you look at Abraham's life in Genesis. It feels like one challenge right after another.
Exactly.
So let's quickly hit the highlights of that core narrative as our sources lay it out. It starts with his family, his father Terah, his brothers Nahor and Haran, and his nephew Lot.
Right. And they're actually differing accounts of his birthplace, either Ur of the Chaldees or perhaps Haran, where the family settled for a time.
Okay. And then the pivotal moment is the calling, right?
Absolutely. God tells Abram to leave everything familiar, his home, his family, his land, and go to a place God will show him. And this command comes with these monumental promises. God will make him a great nation, bless him, make his name great, and crucially, through him, all the families of the earth will be blessed.
Wow. He's 75 years old when he takes off from Haran with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, heading towards Canaan.
Yeah.
But almost immediately, we see that obstacle story pattern kick in.
Exactly. There's a famine in Canaan, which forces them down into Egypt. And here's a difficult moment. Abraham tells Sarai to pretend to be his sister. He's afraid the Egyptians will kill him to take her because she's described as very beautiful.
Which is, a pretty ethically complicated move, isn't it?
It is. But the story goes that Pharaoh does take Sarai into his household.
Right.
But then God intervenes by sending plagues on Pharaoh's household. Pharaoh figures out the deception and expels them. But interestingly, they leave Egypt with significant wealth: silver, gold, livestock, servants.
So they return north to the area of Bethel and Ai and Canaan, but their flocks have grown so large that Abraham's and Lot's herdsmen start fighting over resources. They can't coexist.
Yeah, a classic conflict. This leads Abraham to propose they separate peacefully.
And he gives Lot the first choice of land, which is pretty generous.
Very. Lot looks out at the well-watered plain of the Jordan, heading toward Sodom, and chooses that. Abraham then settles near Hebron, in the plain of Mamre.
Okay, so the separation then sets up the next major event, the rescue of Lot.
Exactly. When a coalition of eastern kings, led by someone called Chedorlaomer, defeats the cities of the plain, including Sodom, and takes Lot and his family prisoner...
Abraham doesn't just sit back.
No. He gathers his trained men, the text says 318 of them, and pursues these kings way up north.
He executes this, daring night raid, defeats the kings, and successfully brings Lot, his family, and all their possessions back.
It's quite the military operation. And on his return, he has this really mysterious encounter with Melchizedek,
Ah, yes, Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of Elion, God Most High.
who brings out bread and wine and blesses Abraham. And Abraham, in return, gives Melchizedek a tenth of everything he recovered.
It's a very significant, though brief, encounter. And the sources also highlight Abraham's integrity here. He refuses to take any spoil from the king of Sodom after the rescue, wanting no one to say they made him rich.
Right. Then the promises are reinforced again with what's called the covenant of the pieces. God speaks to Abram in a vision, repeating that promise of descendants as numerous as the stars and confirming the grant of land.
And they perform this formal covenant ceremony involving animal pieces.
Yes, a very ancient ritual. And in that context, God foretells the future bondage of his descendants in Egypt before describing the full extent of the promised land, listing all the peoples who live there.
But the most pressing obstacle, the big one, still remains.
Yeah.
How will Abraham actually have these descendants? After 10 years in Canaan, Sarai is still barren.
So, following the custom of the time, she gives her Egyptian slave, Hagar, to Abram so he can have a child through her.
And, well, perhaps predictably, as soon as Hagar conceives, tension just explodes.
Right. Hagar begins to despise Sarai, her mistress. Sarai, feeling scorned, mistreats Hagar severely, and Hagar flees into the wilderness.
This leads to another divine encounter, right? At a well.
Yes. An angel finds Hagar, tells her to return and submit to Sarai, but also foretells that her son, Ishmael, will be a wild ass of a man, independent and often in conflict.
Hagar recognizes God's presence, calling him El Roy, which means, thou God seest me. And the well gets a name too, Bir Lahai Roy. Ishmael is born and Abram is 86.
13 years pass. Abram is now 99. God appears again, this time changing his name from Abram to Abraham, meaning father of a multitude or father of many nations.
The name change itself is huge, isn't it? A powerful symbol of that expansive promise.
Absolutely. And then the sign of this renewed covenant is given circumcision.
And Sarai's name is also changed to Sarah. And God makes the incredible, seemingly impossible promise. A son will be born through her, through Sarah, within the next year.
Abraham's initial reaction, according to Genesis, he laughs. I mean, he's 100, she's 90. It seems absurd.
Understandable laughter, maybe, but he obeys God's command, circumcising his entire household, including himself and 13-year-old Ishmael.
A key episode follows this. The visit of the three men at Mamre. Abraham is sitting by his tent in the heat of the day and sees three strangers approaching.
And in this classic display of Middle Eastern hospitality, he rushes out to welcome them, offers water to wash their feet, rest under the tree, and quickly arranges for a really lavish meal. Sarah makes cakes, a prime calf is prepared, curds and milk are served.
And one of the visitors, often understood to be God or an angel representing God, repeats the promise. When he returns next year, Sarah will have a son.
Sarah, who's inside the tent listening, overhears this and laughs quietly to herself, thinking about her age.
Right. But the visitor knows she laughed and asks, is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah denies laughing out of fear, but the point is made.
As the visitors then depart, heading towards Sodom and Gomorrah, God reveals the plan to judge those cities because their sin is so great.
And here we see Abraham step into another role, the intercessor. He engages in this remarkable back and forth, this negotiation with God.
He pleads for the cities, doesn't he? Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He bargains God down, starting from 50 righteous people needed to spare the city.
All the way down to 10. If just 10 righteous people can be found in Sodom, God agrees not to destroy it.
2 of the visitors, now revealed as angels, go on to Sodom and are hosted by Lot. But the men of Sodom surround Lot's house, demanding he bring out his guests so they can know them.
Yeah, confirming the very wickedness Abraham had hoped wasn't universal. Lot tries to protect them, even offers his daughters instead.
Which is another deeply troubling part of the story.
Absolutely. The angels end up striking the men blind and rescuing Lot and his family before the cities are destroyed by fire and brimstone. Abraham looks out the next morning and sees smoke rising, confirming fewer than 10 righteous were found.
The narrative also includes another instance, believe it or not, of Abraham claiming Sarah as his sister, this time with King Abimelech in Gerar in Philistine territory.
It's a repeat scenario. Abimelech takes Sarah, but God warns him in a dream that she's a married woman and he'll die if he doesn't return her, though God acknowledges Abimelech acted in ignorance with a clear conscience.
Okay, so God tells him to return Sarah and adds that Abraham is a prophet who will pray for him.
Abimelech does so immediately, gives Abraham gifts, sheep, oxen, servants, silver as a vindication for Sarah, and invites him to settle in his land. Abraham prays, and God heals Abimelech's household, ending an infertility that had apparently afflicted them.
Later, there's a dispute over a well Abraham dug, which Abimelech's servants seized. Abraham confronts Abimelech, who claims ignorance.
They make a pact, a covenant, over the well. Abraham gives Abimelech sheep and oxen and 7 ewe lambs as proof the well is his. They name the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath or well of 7.
And Abraham plants a tamarisk tree there and calls on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God, establishing his presence in worship.
And then, finally, after all the waiting, all the obstacles, Sarah gives birth to the promised son, Isaac. Abraham is 100 years old.
Isaac is circumcised at 8 days, according to the covenant. And Sarah laughs again, but this time with pure joy, saying, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me.
It's a beautiful moment, but joy is soon mixed with conflict again. At the feast celebrating Isaac's weaning, Sarah sees Ishmael, who's now about 14, mocking or playing the Hebrew is a bit ambiguous.
Whatever it was, it sparks this fierce demand from Sarah to Abraham, send Hagar and Ishmael away. She declares Ishmael will not share the inheritance with Isaac.
Abraham is deeply distressed by this. Ishmael is his son too.
Yeah.
He consults God.
And God tells him, surprisingly perhaps, to listen to Sarah, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. The primary line of promise goes through Isaac.
But crucially, God immediately reaffirms his promise concerning Ishmael too. He tells Abraham not to worry. God will make a great nation of Ishmael as well because he is also Abraham's seed.
So Abraham gets up early, gives Hagar and Ishmael some bread and a skin of water, and sends them away into the wilderness of Beersheba.
They wander, the water runs out, and Hagar puts the boy under a bush and sits down some distance away, weeping, unable to watch him die.
Another desperate
Oh,
moment.
yeah.
But an angel calls out to Hagar from heaven, tells her not to fear, confirms God has heard Ishmael's cries, and reaffirms the promise. He'll be a great nation living on his sword.
And then God opens her eyes, she sees a well, and they're saved. Ishmael grows up in the wilderness of Paran, becomes skilled as an archer, and his mother finds him a wife from Egypt.
This then sets up the final and arguably the most wrenching test of Abraham's faith, the binding of Isaac, the Akedah.
Yeah. God commands Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering.
Just devastating. Abraham obeys without apparent question, gets up early again, saddles his donkey, takes Isaac and 2 servants, and they set off on a 3-day journey.
He leaves the servants behind at the foot of the mountain, telling them they'll worship and then come back, a statement of faith, perhaps. He takes Isaac, the fire, and the knife. Isaac carries the wood for the sacrifice.
And then comes that incredibly poignant question from Isaac. Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?
And Abraham gives that profound, trusting, maybe ambiguous answer. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son.
They reach the place God told him about. Abraham builds an altar, arranges the wood, binds Isaac, and lays him on the altar. He raises the knife.
And just as he's about to sacrifice his son, the angel of the Lord calls out from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son.
Abraham looks up, sees a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, and sacrifices the ram instead of Isaac. He names the place Jehovah-Jireh, meaning the Lord will provide.
And for this ultimate act of obedience, Abraham receives another powerful reaffirmation of the covenant promises. Countless descendants, blessings, victory over enemies, and blessing for all nations through his offspring.
After this, Abraham's later life includes Sarah's death. She dies near Hebron, and Abraham negotiates and buys the cave of Machpelah, the cave of the patriarchs, from Ephron the Hittite as a burial place.
This purchase is significant. It's the first piece of the promised land that Abraham actually owns outright.
After Sarah's death, the text says Abraham takes another wife, or possibly concubine, named Keturah, and has 6 more sons through her.
Right. The sources note he's seen in tradition as the ancestor of many nations beyond just Israel Ishmaelites through Ishmael, Edomites through Isaac's son Esau, Midianites, and others through Keturah's sons, and related to Moabites and Ammonites via his nephew Lot.
He lives to be 175, long enough to see Isaac marry Rebekah and the birth of his grandsons Jacob and Esau. And when he dies, he's buried with Sarah in the cave he bought significantly by both his sons Isaac and Ishmael together.
It's an incredible, sweeping story from Genesis, isn't it? Filled with divine promises, human struggles, ethical complexities, and really foundational events from multiple faiths.
Absolutely. But that leads us to the big question, doesn't it? How do scholars today view the historical context of this narrative? Is this history as we understand it?
This is where things get really fascinating and highlight that deep dive aspect you mentioned. The sources explain that for a long time, say in the early and mid-20th century, many leading archaeologists and scholars, people like William F. Albright,
Right.
they generally thought the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were likely real historical figures, or at least plausible composites representing a type of chieftain from the second millennium BCE. Maybe around 4,000 years ago.
So they were looking for archaeological evidence, maybe texts from that period that would match the stories in Genesis.
Exactly. They were trying to correlate biblical accounts with archaeological findings from the Middle Bronze Age.
Okay, but that perspective shifted.
Dramatically. It was seriously challenged starting in the 1970s, particularly by the work of scholars like Thomas L. Thompson and John Van Seters. Their research really caused a major paradigm shift in how people understand these narratives.
How so? What did they argue?
Well, Thompson, in his book The Historicity of the Patriarchal Narratives, argued pretty forcefully, based on a reevaluation of both archaeology and ancient Near Eastern texts, that there simply wasn't compelling evidence for the patriarchs existing in the second millennium BCE.
So the evidence wasn't there.
Or at least it wasn't unambiguous. He suggested instead that many aspects of the biblical text, social customs, place names, political situations, seem to reflect conditions and concerns from the first millennium BCE much later.
Interesting. And Van Seters.
Van Seters, in his work Abraham in History and Tradition, came at it from a more literary and comparative angle. He analyzed the patriarchal names, the social milieu described in the stories, and the theological messages, and argued strongly that they suggested these narratives were essentially literary creations from that later Iron Age period, again, the first millennium BCE.
Okay, so the core nugget from our sources on this scholarly debate is what? Where did things land?
The sources state that, largely because of these powerful critiques, the scholarly consensus shifted significantly. By the start of the 21st century, they say, archaeologists had, for the most part, given up trying to definitively locate Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob in a specific second millennium BCE historical context.
Wow. So the search for the historical Abraham from 4,000 years ago basically stalled.
In that specific sense, yes. The view that now prevails among most biblical scholars is what's sometimes called minimalists regarding the historicity of these figures in that early period.
Now, that doesn't mean the stories aren't ancient or important, right?
Not at all. It just means they're not generally seen anymore as straightforward historical records of specific individuals who lived way back in the Middle Bronze Age, in the way people like Albright had perhaps hoped.
So, if the written story doesn't directly reflect second millennium history, where did it come from? What are the current ideas?
Well, the sources strongly suggest the story likely had a significant oral prehistory. It was told and retold for generations, perhaps centuries, before it was eventually written down.
Okay, oral tradition first.
Right. And we see mentions of Abraham popping up in later biblical books like Ezekiel and Isaiah, which were written down during or after the Babylonian exile, so in the 6th century BCE, first millennium.
So when was it finally written down as part of Genesis?
The majority view among scholars, according to the material we looked at, is that the written tradition of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, including Genesis and the Abraham story, was compiled and edited into roughly its final form during the Persian period.
The Persian period. So that's after the exile, when the Jews returned to Judea under Persian rule, roughly 520 to 320 BCE.
Exactly. That time frame.
Why then? Why was solidifying this story in writing so important at that specific time? Do the sources offer any hypotheses?
They do. Several interesting ones. One major idea is that the Torah, including the Abraham story, was compiled partly for Persian imperial authorization.
What does that mean?
It means it might have served as a kind of legal charter authorized by the Persian Empire, establishing the laws and identity of the Jewish community living within their empire in Yehud, the province of Judea.
Okay, so a practical political purpose.
Possibly. Another related idea is that compiling the Pentateuch helped define the identity and, importantly, the power structures within the post-exilic Jewish community itself. Who belonged, who held authority, what were the foundational stories everyone agreed on?
And the Abraham story would be central to that identity.
Hugely central. The sources also point to some intriguing evidence from those earlier prophets, Ezekiel and Isaiah, written during the exile. They suggest there might have been tension.
Tension between whom?
between Jewish families who had stayed behind in Judah during the exile and claimed their right to the land through their ancestor Abraham, versus those who were returning from exile in Babylon, whose claims might have been based more on the Moses and Exodus tradition, the liberation and conquest narrative.
Ah. So appealing to Abraham, the original recipient of the land promise, could have been incredibly important for validating the claims of those who would remain connected to the land itself.
Precisely. The figure of Abraham, rooted in the land, particularly around Hebron, likely supported the claims of those landowners.
Okay, so the written text takes shape in the Persian period, likely drawing on older oral traditions. But where did those earliest traditions, the oral ones, even come from? Any ideas on their origins?
Yes, the sources present a few different hypotheses, and there isn't total agreement here. Some scholars still explore a possible Amorite origin for some elements.
Amorite, like from Mesopotamia or Syria in the second millennium.
Exactly. They might link Abraham's traditional origins in Haran to the Amorite homeland, see parallels between the patriarchal migrations and known Amorite movements in the second millennium BCE, or suggest the lifestyle depicted reflects second millennium Amorite culture, maybe attested in texts from places like Mari. The name Abram, Ariam itself, is attested back then.
So that keeps a link to the older period alive, perhaps. What other ideas?
Others lean towards a Palestinian origin for the oldest layers of tradition. They might point to a possible 10th century BCE inscription mentioning a fortress of Abraham in the Negev desert, or theories connecting Abraham to an ancient tribe or place name within Canaan itself, maybe near Beth Shean.
So Abraham as a more local indigenous figure originally.
That's the idea behind some theories. Scholars like Finkelstein and Rumer suggest the oldest traditions might have originated within the land, maybe during the Israelite monarchy, the Iron Age, as an autochthonous hero story. They note that the earliest references outside Genesis in Ezekiel and Isaiah don't mention Mesopotamia. They're just focused on Abraham receiving the promise of land and offspring.
Interesting. So maybe he was originally an ancestor figure worshipped particularly in Hebron, connected to the ancient altar there.
That's one strong possibility explored in the sources. What all this scholarly work really shows is that the story of Abraham, regardless of its precise historical roots way back when, became profoundly significant during the first millennium BCE, especially in that crucial period of exile and return. It helped shape identity, land claims, and fundamental religious understanding.
Which brings us perfectly to his absolutely enormous and ongoing significance across religious traditions. I mean, his stature is just incredibly high, not just in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but in other faiths too.
It really is remarkable. In Judaism, he's Abraham Avinu, which means our father Abraham. He's seen fundamentally as the biological ancestor of the Jewish people and, even more importantly, the father of Judaism itself, the very first Jew.
The one who first recognized the one God and entered into that covenant relationship.
Exactly. He models that life lived in covenant with God. And his story isn't just history. It's read liturgically in weekly Torah portions. It's a central living text.
And the sources mention some fascinating details from later Jewish tradition and legends, right? Not strictly from Genesis.
Oh, absolutely. Things like his mother's name being given as Am-Matlazi Bat Karnebo, or that famous story from the Midrash, the collections of rabbinic interpretation about him as a youth working in his father Terah's idol shop.
Right, the idol smasher story.
Yes. Recognizing the folly of idolatry, he smashes the idols, leaving just the largest one with a stick in its hand, and then cleverly blames it when his father asks what happened. It's a story about his early wisdom and rejection of idolatry.
And there's the tradition he was miraculously saved from a fiery furnace by King Nimrod for refusing to worship idols.
Correct. Legends also say he studied with Noah and Shem, connecting him back to the earliest righteous figures and the priesthood line. His hospitality, like with the three visitors, becomes legendary, a key virtue.
And tradition sees him not just as receiving God's blessing, but actively teaching knowledge of the one God to everyone he encountered.
Yes, and his name becomes inextricably linked with God in prayer and identity, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Tradition even sees him, through his various descendants, as the father of some 30 nations.
Okay, so that's Judaism. Moving to Christianity, how is Abraham viewed there? He's obviously important.
Hugely important. Christians revere him as a great hero of faith and a prophet to whom God revealed himself directly, initiating that crucial covenant relationship.
But the emphasis shifts somewhat, doesn't it?
It does. A key insight from the sources on the Christian view comes from Paul the Apostle, especially in his letters like Romans and Galatians in the New Testament.
What does Paul argue?
Paul interprets the promise made to Abraham that through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed in a new light after Christ. He argues that the true seed or offspring of Abraham isn't just about physical descent.
Okay. So who is it then?
It's about faith. Paul argues that all who believe in Jesus Christ, whether they are Jewish or Gentile, are effectively included in the seed of Abraham. They become inheritors of the promises made to Abraham through their faith, just as Abraham himself was counted righteous because of his faith in God's promise.
So faith becomes the defining characteristic, mirroring Abraham's own faith.
Exactly. Romans chapter 4, for instance, holds up Abraham's unwavering faith, believing God's promise of a son, even when it seemed impossible, as the ultimate model for Christian believers. It shows that righteousness comes through trusting God, not solely through adherence to the law of Moses, which came later.
So he becomes a spiritual father to Christians.
Precisely. Church leaders throughout history picked up on this. The sources mention Augustine calling Christians children of Abraham by faith, Ambrose saying Christians possess the promises through faith, and Martin Luther seeing Abraham as the fundamental paradigm of the man of faith.
Wow. And this is reflected in worship, too.
Yes. The Roman Catholic Church, for example, honors him as our Father in faith. In the Eucharistic prayer, their most central liturgical prayer, he's commemorated in the calendars of saints in various denominations. The sources give specific dates for Lutheran, Anglican, and Eastern Orthodox churches.
And patron saint of the hospitality industry. That's fun.
Reflecting that welcome of the three visitors at Mamre, he's also commemorated in Eastern Orthodoxy as the righteous forefather Abraham, mentioned in liturgy and prayers. And there's even that simple children's hymn, Father Abraham had many sons.
Right. Okay, so Judaism and Christianity, now Islam. How does Abraham, or Ibrahim, fit in?
Ibrahim is absolutely crucial in Islam. He's seen as a vital link in the long chain of prophets that began with Adam and culminates in Muhammad.
A link specifically through which son?
Specifically through his son Ishmael, or Ismail in Arabic, from whom Arabs, and therefore Muhammad, trace their lineage.
And he features prominently in the Quran.
Incredibly so.
Right.
The sources point out he's mentioned in 35 different chapters of the Quran. That's more than any other biblical figure except for Moses.
What are the key descriptions or titles given to him?
He's called a Hanif. This is a very important term, meaning a pure, primordial monotheist, someone who maintained the pure worship of the one God before the specific revelations of Judaism or Christianity. He's also called a Muslim, in the literal sense of one who submits to God's will.
So he's like the archetype of the perfect Muslim.
Exactly. He's seen as a prophet, a patriarch, the ideal model of submission to God, Islam. And significantly, he's revered as the fish who, with Ishmael, reformed or rebuilt the Kaaba in Mecca, purifying it from idols and rededicating it to the worship of the one God, connecting Islam's holiest site back to this foundational monotheism.
So he's seen as the original founder of pure monotheism.
He's considered the first pioneer of Islam, establishing the Millaj Abraham, the religion of Abraham, whose fundamental mission was proclaiming the absolute oneness of God, Tawhid.
Does he have special titles in Islam?
Yes, a very high one. Khalilullah, which means the friend of God. This title emphasizes his closeness and special relationship with God. He, along with Isaac, Isaac, and Jacob, Yaqub, is seen as among the most excellent and honorable people in God's sight. He's referred to as father of Muslims and held up constantly as a role model.
It's fascinating how central he is. What about other traditions mentioned in the sources? The Druze.
Yes, the Druze, a distinct esoteric faith originating from Ismaili Islam, also regard Abraham highly. They see him as the third spokesman, or Natik, after Adam and Noah, who transmitted the foundational principles of monotheism, Tawhid. He's one of their 7 key prophets.
And Mandaism. That's a much older Gnostic religion, right?
Correct. An ancient religion from Mesopotamia. They call him Abraham. He appears in their sacred text, the Ginza Rabbah, or Ginza, acknowledged as the patriarch of the Jewish people.
But there's a key difference.
Yes, a really interesting one highlighted in the sources. Mandaeans apparently believe Abraham was originally a Mandaean priest himself, but they fundamentally disagree with him on the issue of circumcision.
Why?
Because Mandaeism forbids any form of bodily mutilation, so they reject circumcision, seeing it as something Abraham wrongly adopted.
Fascinating. Okay, and the Baha'i faith, how do they view Abraham?
In the Baha'i faith, Abraham is considered a manifestation of God. That's their term for the great divine messengers or prophets who appear throughout history, like Moses, Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and the founders of the Baha'i faith itself, the Bab and Baha'u'llah.
So on that same level.
Yes, he's seen as the originator of the cycle of monotheistic religion. Baha'i texts affirmed his Mesopotamian origins and state he spoke Hebrew when he crossed the Jordan. They describe his struggle against the pervasive idolatry of his family and people.
Similar to the Jewish Midrash story.
Somewhat, yes. That he faced opposition from his government and kin, rejected their gods, and was ultimately forced to leave his homeland for the Holy Land, supported only by Lot and a few others.
And what about the sacrifice story in the Baha'i view? This is a crucial point from the sources.
Yes, very crucial. According to Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, the voice of God, commanded Abraham to offer up Ishmael as a sacrifice, not Isaac.
Ishmael. Why the difference?
The purpose, in the Baha'i understanding, was to demonstrate Abraham's absolute steadfastness, his detachment from even his beloved son, and his complete obedience to God. This act is also seen symbolically as a spiritual ransom for the sins of the world.
Interesting. Does he have titles in Baha'i texts?
He's often called the friend of God, similar to the Islamic title Hallelujah. He's revered as the founder of monotheism. And maybe the most unique nugget here from the sources is the Baha'i belief that Abraham is united in spirit and reality with all the other manifestations of God. They are seen as fundamentally one in their purpose, reflecting the same divine light, though their specific laws and social teachings differ according to the time and place they appeared.
So Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, Baha'u'llah, all spiritually connected back to Abraham.
In that Baha'i understanding, yes, they are all part of one unfolding divine plan initiated with Abraham.
It is truly remarkable how this one figure, Abraham, resonates so deeply and holds such foundational importance across this vast tapestry of human belief systems. Interpreted uniquely, yes, but utterly central.
Absolutely. And his influence doesn't stop at religious texts and theology. Abraham has also left this really indelible mark on art, literature, and music throughout history.
Right. You see those key scenes from his life depicted constantly in paintings and sculptures, don't you?
All the time. The sacrifice of Isaac is perhaps the most common and dramatic one, but also Abraham's meeting with Melchizedek, him entertaining the three visitors at Mamre, Hagar, and Ishmael in the desert. These are recurring themes.
And in Christian art specifically, there's that image of Lazarus resting in the bosom of Abraham. Where does that come from?
That's drawn from a parable Jesus tells in the Gospel of Luke. It describes the afterlife, where the righteous poor man Lazarus is comforted in paradise, figuratively resting in Abraham's embrace. So artists often depict Abraham physically holding Lazarus, or sometimes a group of souls representing the righteous departed.
Okay. And the sources mention some famous artists who tackle Abraham.
Oh, many. Rembrandt, of course, has powerful depictions. Tissot, Donatello, Raphael. And going way back, the sources mention the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus from the 4th century.
What's significant about that?
It's considered probably the single most famous piece of early Christian relief sculpture, and it prominently features the sacrifice of Isaac alongside scenes from Jesus' life, showing that early connection.
And more recently?
The sources mention George Segal's 20th century sculpture, Abraham's Farewell to Ishmael, which uses his signature style with plaster gauze figures to capture the emotion of that difficult separation.
In Christian iconography, you mentioned the sacrifice of Isaac is often seen as more than just a story.
Yes, it's frequently interpreted theologically as a foreshadowing, or what's called a type, of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. Abraham's willingness to offer his beloved son prefigures God the Father's offering of Jesus. It's also sometimes linked to the Eucharist or the Mass.
And the three visitors.
They are sometimes interpreted, especially in Eastern Orthodox tradition, as a prefiguration or even a symbolic representation of the Holy Trinity. Think of Andrei Rublev's incredibly famous icon, the Trinity, which depicts only the three angelic visitors seated at the table.
Right. And if Abraham is shown alone in portraits, how might we recognize him?
Often, according to the sources, he might be shown with an accessory, most commonly a sword or a knife, clearly referencing that pivotal, dramatic moment of the binding of Isaac.
Okay, so visual art. What about literature? Has his story inspired writers?
Deeply. Perhaps most famously in philosophy, there's Søren Kierkegaard's incredibly influential book, Fear and Trembling.
Ah, yes. What's that about?
It dives deep into the psychological, ethical, and existential turmoil of Abraham's decision in the binding of Isaac. Kierkegaard explores the concept of the teleological suspension of the ethical, the idea that faith might require obeying God even when it seems to contradict universal moral laws. It's a profound meditation on faith, doubt, and anxiety.
Heavy stuff. Any fictional takes?
The sources mention a couple. W.G. Hardy wrote a fictionalized novel called Father Abraham, and Lynn Reed Banks, who wrote The Indian in the Cupboard, also wrote short stories called Sarah and After, which retell parts of the Genesis narrative from Sarah's perspective.
Giving her a voice and music. Has Abraham's story been set to music?
Yes, particularly the sacrifice story. Baroque composers like Marc-Antoine Charpentier wrote a dramatic motet or oratorio called Sacrificium Abrahe, and Sébastien de Bressard wrote a cantata Abraham ou le sacrifice d'Isaac.
Or recently.
A very interesting contemporary example mentioned is Steve Reich's 1994 minimalist opera, The Cave.
What's the concept there?
It explores the story of Abraham and his legacy, specifically centered around the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, but it does so by incorporating interviews and perspectives from Jews, Christians, and Muslims living today, recounting and interpreting the story from their different traditions. It's a fascinating juxtaposition.
Wow. And there was a pop culture reference, too.
Yeah, kind of unexpected. Bob Dylan's classic song, Highway 61 Revisited, the very first stanza goes, "Oh, God said to Abraham, kill me a son." Abe says, "Man, you must be putting me on." God say, "No." Abe say, "What?" God say, "You can do what you want, Abe, but the next time you see me coming, you better run." Well, Abe says, "Where do you want this killing done?" God says, "Out on Highway 61.
Huh. A very Dylan-esque take on the command.
Indeed. And the sources note the biographical connection that Dylan's own father was named Abram Zimmerman.
Right. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground here. We've journeyed from that detailed, complex biblical narrative in Genesis through the fascinating twists and turns of how scholars grapple with its historical context.
Yeah, the whole second millennium versus first millennium debate.
Then exploring Abraham's profound and incredibly varied significance across Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and other faiths.
Each seeing him through their own unique lens, yet all claiming him as foundational.
And finally, touching on his enduring impact on art, literature, and even music. His influence is just, well, it's undeniable, isn't it?
It truly is. He stands almost alone, perhaps, as a figure so absolutely central to the identity and beliefs of literally billions of people, interpreted in such diverse ways, yet somehow foundational across such a wide spectrum of faith and culture for millennia.
It really leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? How can a single figure, known primarily through these ancient narratives, stories passed down, how can that figure continue to inspire such devotion, such connection, and sometimes, let's be honest, be a point of difference or even conflict between communities right across thousands of years?
It's a powerful question. What does this tell you, the listener, about the enduring power of narrative itself and the power of faith in the human experience? How can one story hold so much weight for so long?